How's 2020 going so far for people here?
It's good.
How many are looking forward to 2020? How many feel like it can't be any worse than 2019? Guess what? Guess what? It can be worse. It will be worse, just not yet.
That's right.
How many consider the whole idea of the new year to be kind of an arbitrary construct and silly and stupid? Why should you celebrate one point in the Earth's orbit around the sun rather than another point? Kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's
I don't
fine.
know.
It's like a birthday.
So-
Birthday is absolutely meaningless.
Well, yeah, although it means you've kind of orbited around the Earth one more time. Now, to me, a birthday means a very different thing, though. It doesn't mean those little celebrations, the cake that you blow out as you go through life. It means the day you actually come out and start breathing.
Right. Well, it is for Social Security.
But then you have, after you only have one birthday, then you have anniversaries.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right, exactly. So, and actually, the Bible says that, the breath is the life, so when you first take your breath, that's actually your soul, and that's when your life begins. Yeah, so, that's also why, when you sneeze, during the Middle Ages especially, people got in the habit of saying, bless you, because when you sneeze, that was literally your soul kind of briefly popping out of you, like that scene in Doctor Strange where he gets knocked out of his body, his ectoplasmic spirit. And if you sneeze and your spirit kind of briefly pops out before going back in, that's a demon could come in and possess you right at that moment. It could sneak in while your soul is briefly absent. So that's why they always said bless you, because it'll prevent that. So Ashley can learn all kinds of stuff if you remember to tell her, Eric.
I have a problem stop saying, I like, because I'm used to saying God bless you. I think it's very unpoetic, whatever it is. It sounds like a sneeze. So it almost comes naturally, when somebody sneezes to say bless you.
But gesundheit sounds like that too.
A little, yes.
So
yes.
get to
So
have
I
the same,
get it.
if you're an atheist, you have to get to have the same gesundheit. Plus you gotta black out the in God on all your dollar bills. Anyways, well, so maybe it is meaningless, or the much ado about nothing, but it's instructive really to think about how much the marking of time would be, having to do with birthdays and so forth, how much that whole way of doing things affects us as human beings. Just imagine if there were no minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and so on. What must it have been like for our distant ancestors who did not know of such things? And what did people think about the people who first invented that? In fact, here's the count. I have another cartoon later. The invention of the wheel, people probably did say, hey, that's a great idea, but what did people say about the invention of time measuring, at least, more than just seasons and months and so on? The history of it, and most of it, there's been a lot written about this, but not really too much about how it really changed the whole rhythm of life. Cell phones have changed your life, but that's something people glommed onto. We'll talk more about this because our whole subject about change. But keep in mind, it's not an accident that there are 7 days in the week. That's how many heavenly bodies moved around, including the moon and the sun. That's how many, they could see 5 planets and the moon and the sun. That's why there's 7 days in a week, one name for each one. That was probably a selling point when they first came up with that. The deities for which the days of the week are named were not, of course, deities from the holy books. They were the planets and the sun and the moon. You could see them. There wasn't any saying there was no such thing. But probably months and the seasons were the earliest actual divisions of time.
So coming up with 7 days precedes the Bible, saying.
Oh, yes. Sure. Oh, yeah. Almost everything precedes the Bible. So anyway, the units of time, interesting stuff there. Okay, so here's what I was talking about, Those who have written about these things seem to take the attitude that our ancestors not having convenient ways to measure time, that was burdensome for them. Oh, how terrible it was to have to live without that. But, it's really not the same as not having the wheel, motor vehicles, or electricity. Living without electricity, that would be burdensome. But our distant ancestors, they wouldn't have had a need, much less any desire to know, as we put it today, what time it is. The ancient Egyptians famously only needed to know when the Nile would overflow its banks. And the truth is not so much that our modern way of life depends on accurate timekeeping, and it does, but that our recognition, our awareness, and understanding and measurement of time transform human existence as much or more than did such things as clothing, fire, and the domestication of animals and plants. It's why we cannot think of history in our own lives, even our day-to-day experience, except in linear terms. We go forward and the memories looking back. Other cultures had often thought of time in terms of cycles, for example. But if I say 1066, you think about medieval times, right? Or you think of the Battle of Hastings, which happened in that year.
Crusaders.
The Crusaders. And if I say 2036, you're thinking, oh, is that when Alien or some other sci-fi movie was happening? And you think that, that's kind of far off in the future. But if I say 3520, you think, whoa, that's so far in the future, I'm not sure I can imagine even what things might be like then. So the point is this, that the ideas and the innovations that drive one another in a process of reinforcing ramification. We're getting ahead of myself, somehow I jumped ahead. Okay. The ideas and the innovations that kind of feed back on each other. I'm not sure which way, but it's sort of like chicken and egg. These things change our way of life in large part because they change us. And perhaps many things like time are real, something people discover more than they invent. And perhaps our ideas depend not just on how the world works, but on how our brain works, how our minds work. Is there a difference between our brains and our mind? That'd be a whole other church service, but that these things change us. And to the extent that we do not realize how they affect us, we don't really understand them as well as we may think we do. In other words, if we just kind of go with the flow and don't even consider how they change us, we're not going to get it. So, this is nowhere so true as when it comes to matters of religion. For religion has to do not so much with the supernatural, with gods and devils, and what happens to you when you're not. That's a wonderful contradiction in terms, that what happens to you when you're not? When we use this term die, like dying is something you do, like riding a bike or something, and no, it's not really accurate. Real religion has to do with what our lives and the world really are in an existential sense, the meaning of life, or at any rate, what sorts of meaning we can find in it and why, and what psychologists call the locus of control. How many have heard that, the locus of control? Of whether you feel, and the extent to which you feel, yourself to be the master of my fate, as the poem says, and the captain of my soul. All religions offer their solutions to these things, which, as we know, are reliably absurd when they're rooted in the supernatural nonsense, and this is especially true when it comes to the religious question of the nature and bounds of morality, both when it comes to how we interact with others and how we consider and how we treat ourselves. For to say that one should love one's neighbor as oneself, obviously that has to do with how we regard ourselves, as much as it has to do with how we regard our neighbor. Yet what can we say of Christian morality that urges people to, oh yes, love your neighbor as yourself, and then they insist at the same time that, quote, I'm quoting Jesus himself actually saying, you have to hate your father and your mother and your wife and your children, your brethren and sisters, and your own life too. If you hate all those things, how are you going to treat your neighbor? We freethinkers see that as going beyond absurdity. It's obscenity. Or at any rate, believers have had thousands of years to explain why it's not absurd, why it's not obscene, but of course they've never done so. And this is all by way of saying that while we may correctly recognize that in some sense it is arbitrary and even somewhat silly to make a huge deal of the past Wednesday being the new year and start saying it's no longer 2019, but now it's 2020, we must not miss the point of what the passage of time is about, what it means, and how it affects us in our way of life. If nothing else, it is a reminder of the limited duration of our lives. I actually heard a little segment on NPR on the way over here this morning talking about people who were, had near-death experiences or almost died, and quoted a guy who, did anybody else listen to NPR? The guy was saying that ever since that happened to him, he feels like he's living in overtime. And every moment has to count. And if only everybody lived all of their lives like that. Anyway, like so many elements of the human condition, this is worth considering, worth exploring, worth coming back to again and again, as it is one of the big questions, one of the big puzzles and problems attaching to the human experience, and one of many such things that the traditional religions succeed in getting people really to just ignore it and evade it by distracting them with their supernatural nonsense. And that's really what a truly thinking person's religion of free thought is about. It's not just about rejecting gods and supernaturalism or finding fault with traditional religions. That's really just almost too easy. Anyway, Freethought is even more about taking up the subjects that the traditional religions neglect and abuse, of giving these important religious questions the attention and thought they deserve, for there is not even one solution or answer to them that fits everyone, or that fits any one of us in all circumstances. All such solutions or answers are in fact meaningless without your arriving at them by your own effort, by thinking them through, just as you don't really understand a mathematical theorem without working through the proof that demonstrates it. So the difference between knowing something and the rote memory of just knowing what somebody else said. And this is the bedrock of what we talk about in our Church of Freethought. So this is not so much a creed as a few simple guiding ideas. I want to hear from you if you don't agree or think that there's something wrong with this. If only the traditional religions would ask you to criticize their tenets, as we do. We don't demand a statement of faith or anything. What we ask for is that you doubt. We ask that you realize that beliefs, which is only where thinking leaves off, that they ought to be grounded in facts and reason. And if new facts or better reasoning come along, well, then change your beliefs. Even better, don't have any beliefs at all. You don't really need to, at least not the sort of beliefs that so many have, the sort that they seem to regard as if they were body parts that would cripple them to give up. So that's all. It's simple. Well, except that it's not. And that is when we help and rely on one another in this scary experience of being human beings. That's why we're doing it together here instead of watching YouTube. We often mention some other things that have happened on the date we hold our monthly service today as a new year begins, and some say a new decade also begins. We have that little discussion. You arrived late, Greg, you were going on about that. Just like with the year 2000 being celebrated as the start of the new millennium, even though it was really just the last year of the 20th century, for which the 20th century was named. We have a short video to put some images and ideas in your mind. Of course, freethinkers will find some things to be skeptical about in this video and even to object to, I think, but that's part of life, even here. Believe me, a lot of other 2019 year in review videos that I watched online were even more US-centric, and a few were really about nothing but Donald Trump, 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 Trump. So, for your consideration, toggle over to this first video.
They have the decade in review or just the year in review?
There's a few little things, I don't know if this is gonna run properly. Uh-oh, it's not gonna, I can see it, but you all can't.
Yours.
Plus it's too loud, so turn it down. You hear that? Oh, okay, so I'll just move it over. Maybe you can see it too.
Bring blossomed across North Africa and the Middle East.
Barack Obama has been re-elected.
Edward Snowden.
Support is for those forgotten children who want education.
Charlie Hebdo's marriage equality.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union.
Worst refugee crisis.
Fight for your lives before it's someone else's job.
No.
Well, TikTok, ADHD in app form.
Old Town Road became the longest running #1 single in Billboard's history.
Still too loud.
Yeah, it's so loud, you can't,
I know.
can't
You're
hear it.
not upset.
It's so loud, you can't hear it.
Yeah, it's just this, adjust the volume. I thought there was another volume control on here somewhere.
Just hit the bottom.
I know, but I've got to get, see, what you see and what I see are not the same.
Right.
That's the problem.
Is there a volume deal on that laptop?
The volume thing is down here at the bottom. So
Yeah.
move this up.
That DLC? There should be a volume control. on it.
There is, but we can't see it at all. It's down here somewhere. I don't know why that's being blocked. Isn't there a control
Oh,
on
yeah.
here?
No, that's not it.
I usually one down here. Can you do it that way?
I can do it this way.
Okay. So I did, there's a double screen there, somehow I got stuck on that. Okay, so let me try it again.
Avengers Endgame, officially the highest grossing movie of all time.
The Emmy goes to Phoebe
Waller-Bridge. United States of America, champions of the world.
Okay, goodness. Trump is now ordering federal government workers to go back to work without getting paid.
It's official. The government shutdown is now the longest in U.S. history.
There's no sense that there's any room for the two sides to really find a compromise. Both are digging in.
We have Big Macs, we have quarter pounders and cheese, we have everything that I like, that you like. The reason we did this is because of the shutdown. We need border security, we have to have it.
Despicable living conditions, migrants in standing room cells for a week.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border.
Special counsel Robert Mueller has delivered his final report.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
We're going to impeach him. President Trump is maintaining that there was no wrongdoing on his part in his phone call with the president of Ukraine.
A history-making headline, the third time in history a sitting U.S. president impeached.
The 2020 presidential race is heating up.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against Americans anymore.
Who can beat Donald Trump?
No one is above the law, and that includes the President of the United States.
Hoy les anuncio que estaré renunciando
A mi cargo de presidencia.
I have not been able to deliver Brexit.
بالتالي استقالة أصبحت أمر مطلوب كجزء من التهدئة.
India is counting votes for the world's biggest democratic election.
Narendra Modi has sweat to a crushing general election win.
Tensions rising between India and Pakistan over Kashmir.
The long-planned Turkish military operation in northeast Syria has been launched.
Chaos in Venezuela. Both the opposition leader and President Maduro are calling for supporters to protest.
We are witnessing a wave of demonstrations around the world. From the Middle East to Latin America and the Caribbean.
Bienvenido a la generación del yo no me dejo, lo quiero Puerto Rico.
From Europe to Africa and Asia. It is clear that there is a growing deficit of trust between people and political establishments and rising threats to the social contract.
The young could say what's in store.
Yo sí quiero un cambio y yo no voy a dejar que los demás hablen por mí.
What's lurking around the corners.
其实民主的基础本来就是建立在人民上。
It's their future. They have every right to inherit it.
A teenager from Sweden called the Voice of the Planet is ready to cross the Atlantic on a mission to fight climate change.
The eyes of all future generations are upon you, and if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you.
This is the start of a day of global climate strikes, inspired by teen activist Greta Thunberg.
You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal.
A new United Nations report warns the impacts of climate change are increasing and inevitable. An environmental disaster with global implications.
The Amazon rainforest is burning at record rates. New Delhi, air pollution is putting the health of millions of people at risk there.
Cyclone that has swept across southern Africa.
Kerala, for a second consecutive year, is backing floods in some districts.
Hurricane Dorian devastated the Bahamas.
Please pray for us, everyone, please pray for us.
We have seen what we thought was unseeable.
Taiwan will be the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage.
We are not immune to the viruses of hate, of fear, of other.
We never have been. But we can be the nation that discovers the cure. The answer lies in our humanity.
You're breathtaking. You're all breathtaking.
The first man to run a marathon in under 2 hours.
We are here, but we have to do something nurturing that we respect before we go. To love somebody, to take care of somebody.
Exactly.
To make one other person feel good. And that just seems to make life not just livable, but a gallant event.
Some stories they gave half a second to, and then some 10 or 20 seconds.
Mostly,
It wasn't really,
a year.
yeah, it was,
Mostly it was a year.
Most of it was here, and you had a little intro with some other things. But, just, kind of nice to have that reminder of things there.
even on the desk, we only had like 4 or 5. They didn't have the biggest one.
Let's see, Russell, all right.
I
Homemade.
don't think that's who it was.
Is it Nipsey Hussle?
That's the hustle.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
different guy. Yeah.
Okay, so now this is a good time to pause briefly. Do you remember the life of NTCOF member Ethel Mormon, who died this past December 2nd, the day after our last service, after a long illness, and she had a bone marrow transplant for bone marrow cancer that she had been living with for quite a while. She had a bone marrow transplant over the summer, and unfortunately it did not work, did not take. A funeral ceremony was held December 20th at the National Cemetery, where it turns out her remains are interred quite near to the grave of our friend Paul Myers, who died in August of 2017. Unlike Paul's ceremony, in which some God words were said, Ethel was remembered as a proud and lifelong atheist, humanist, and freethinker. We're really miss her. By the way, though, Paul Myers' marker, I didn't take a picture of it, but you did.
Yeah.
So I should have gotten that for you, and I could have put it up here. But he's got the atheist symbol on his marker.
Is he in the same cemetery?
He's in the same cemetery, just not very far physically from.
What is the atheist symbol? I don't know.
It's an A with like electrons circulating, like an atom. So Ethel was quite an extraordinary person, and we're really going to miss her. A lot of effort goes into our monthly service. Each is original, unique, and different. Not the only one who's presented. Don has presented. John Goche has presented. Will has presented. Even read some children's stories that were just fascinating to think about. So we hope that today's going to be one of our really good programs. We once wondered whether we'd run out of material, a lot of things to think about, talk about, but there's no danger of that, especially, as I said, with the traditional religions doing it so badly. Believe it or not, we've been holding these monthly services now since our first time on February 5th of 1995. So as of next month, we're going to have been doing these for 25 years. We're going to need to have birthday cake brought. Who's going to bring birthday cake next time? Need a volunteer. Well, now don't all jump up and fight about it. Are we going to have a vote? Have a vote to decide who's going to do it?
You're gonna have to have a caterer.
Well, gonna need a birthday cake. I guess I'll just put out the call. One of you is just too embarrassed to make the offer, so come and speak to me afterwards. But anyways, let us know how we're doing and how we might do it better. Talking, that's what families do, and that's kind of how we are. We're a unit social organization. That's what churches are. Units of social organization is larger than the family, and smaller than the larger community. Help us do things better. Several of our members, as I said, have given wonderful presentations. It could be just something you come across, a poem. You show me this book you're going to read on your phone. There might be some passage in there that you think that, gee, this is a good nugget, and let's have that, put it up on the screen and talk about it. Whatever strikes you as important, educational, or inspiring, that's likely to strike the rest of us the same way, or maybe a little bit differently, since that's what we're here to do, compare notes, as it were. And it's worth considering for presentation on one of our services. We have other things going on every month as well. Game night every Friday at the IHOP at I-35 and Northwest Highway, not very far from here. Several people here now are regular participants in that. Raise your hand if you don't mind answering any questions later from others who might be interested in coming to game night. Owen is our one newbie, so you can talk to Kid or Don and Mark who participate in the game night. I'd tell you more, but I have to say that I was told in no uncertain terms that what happens at game night stays at game night. Our non-first Sundays of the month, we have our salon, which is just an unstructured discussion conversation over breakfast. If you choose to bring breakfast or purchase it from the hotel, we start at 10 a.m. at the Embassy Suites on Bass Pro Drive. They put the food away at 10:30, so if you want to eat their food, and they have made-to-order omelets and really a nice spread. And every once in a while, when you go to pay at the checkout at the main desk, they just wave this off and say, forget about it. So that's kind of nice too, because like being at the casino, you might win.
I don't know about 10 a.m., probably 10:15, 10:30.
Well, they put the food away at 10:30.
Right, but I'm saying when we meet.
Oh, when you meet.
Yeah.
Well, if you show up around 10 and get your breakfast, then
Right, there might
people
not
will
be
start
any-
showing up by the time you're ready to sit down. Anyway, so these are, the details are all the back page of the bulletin, which if you lose yours, we put them up on our website. There's dozens and dozens of past bulletins. I think we generate more new, unique, different material on a regular basis than any other atheist group in the country and maybe the world, and just always something there. And then in June and September of this year, the hotel had something else going on in this room on the first Sunday, and probably some of that where they're going to get rooms rented or some reason, some motivation for kicking us out for those 2 months. We had a little discussion ahead of time about what to do about that, either get a different meeting place for the first Sunday or meet here the second Sunday, and it seemed like most people felt it was better to keep the venue at this location. So I will talk to Mr. Patel, the manager, and tell him we're definitely going to want to be here for the second. That's in June and September, and there'll be many reminders as we go forward. We can always do more, but it takes people to come up with the ideas, and what's more important, to put the ideas into action. Give it some thought. Could be a one-time, a one-off of some kind. Go see a movie or meet somewhere. Put your free thinking into action and enjoy the rewards of helping in some way to push the world in a better direction. But that's really what we're all here to do. We always need volunteers to assist with the child care Sunday service, when Sunday school, when we have it. Kit here has been doing that since Merlin moved away to Georgia, the two of them, so she really needs a partner, somebody when she can't make it, if there are kids that show up. And it's kind of fun to show the kids a good time. We'll usually just use this back area or another space, play games, let them draw pictures, and talk to them about, if they're old, age-appropriate stuff. The older kids are always a lot of fun to talk to because they'll talk about what their experiences of interacting with the believers, and believe me, they need some guidance on that. So, Mark Barnick is our welcome person. John Hendricks in the back here brings he's the AV wrangler, so it'd be nice if there was a backup person for him as well. And of course, John Goche is our videographer. Glad to see you here, John. We missed you. Really much missed you last month. Hope you had a good time with your family in Louisiana. Anyway, there's always lots to do. We could always do more. We'll have we've had a book club in the past. We could do that again. Another thing we might have, like I said, is a film or movie event. Could be held anywhere. We could bring our projector and with a laptop show something. Lots of things are doable and can be rewarding. I'll just say it again, you are this church, and I encourage you to think of how you can make use of it to do good things. If you think like most of us that there's something seriously wrong with the traditional religions, instead of just cursing the darkness, help us light that candle and do religion right. So we'll move on then to moments of science, plural, because I have another video to show you. I'm going to let the American Association for the Advancement of Science do all the heavy lifting for me this month on that subject. AAAS is a terrific organization of mostly professional scientists that I personally belonged to for over 40 years. It's not like you have to be a university professor to belong, although I'm a kind of a university professor, assistant, associate. They do, the AAAS does a lot of good work to fulfill their purpose, advancing science, including publishing this weekly science magazine. I really consider them a far more reliable source of science reporting than the popular media that so often gets things wrong. This is what the AAAS produced as a review of important scientific progress in 2019. I think you'll enjoy this.
Every year, reporters and editors at Science choose several runners-up and one breakthrough of the year. Before we get to the breakthrough, here are the runners-up. In Mexico, researchers have drilled rock cores from the Chicxulub crater. The cores chronicle in minute-by-minute detail the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. Other studies have revealed how the impact immediately destroyed living things thousands of kilometers away, and how mammals and plants recovered in the thousands of years that followed. A team of physicists claimed its rudimentary quantum computer performed a calculation in 200 seconds that would overwhelm a conventional supercomputer. The achievement is known as quantum supremacy, and it marks a significant milestone on the long road to a fully functioning quantum computer. Artificial intelligence systems have conquered a variety of complex two-person games, but this year, a system called Pluralist upped the ante. It beat professional players in thousands of six-hand games of no-limit Texas Hold'em poker, a vastly more complex challenge. Denisovans, the extinct cousins of Neanderthals, have been known only by scraps of fossils from a Russian cave in Siberia. But their genetic traces are found in modern humans, especially in Melanesia and Australia. This year, scientists used a new protein method to identify a jawbone found on the Tibetan Plateau as Denisovan. It's the first physical trace of a Denisovan found outside Siberia. And another research group used genetic data to reconstruct the face of a Denisovan girl. The search for effective treatments for Ebola has seen a string of disappointments. But this year, 2 drugs tested during the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo dramatically increased a patient's chance of survival. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft celebrated the new year by relaying images of an icy object from the far reaches of the solar system, 1.6 billion kilometers beyond Pluto. It looks like 2 merged lumpy pancakes. Researchers believe it hasn't been disturbed since the formation of the solar system, and it holds clues to how planets form. A series of studies has indicated that some severely malnourished children recuperate slowly, if at all, because their gut microbes remain in an immature state. This year, researchers came up with nutritional supplements that help the gut flora in these children recover, paving the way for more effective treatments. A drug combination approved this year in the United States aims to turn cystic fibrosis from a progressively damaging lung disease into a manageable chronic illness for most patients. The treatment, which counteracts the effects of a genetic mutation carried by 90% of cystic fibrosis patients, comes 30 years after researchers identified the gene behind the disease. This year, microbiologists took a major step toward understanding the origin of eukaryotes, the group that includes plants, animals, and other organisms with cell nuclei. After 12 years of trying, they succeeded in culturing a microbe that belongs to an elusive group called Asgardarchaea. They are the closest relatives to eukaryotes, according to recent DNA analyses. Now, researchers have this missing link in hand to study. And now, the breakthrough of the year. In a technical tour de force, astronomers combined observations from dozens of radio telescope dishes at 8 observatories around the globe to generate the first image of a black hole. The image shows a ring of light surrounding a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy 53 million light years from Earth. Science is recognizing this impressive international collaboration and its impact on our understanding of the cosmos as the 2019 Breakthrough of the Year.
Sorry, did you want to see the credits?
Nope.
It could be a post-credit scene if, you made a breakthrough or something, I suppose. Anyway,
Now we can open up the discussion.
comment about that?
Interesting about that other race.
The Denisovans,
Yeah, yeah.
similar to the Neanderthals.
Never heard of them before.
In fact, they didn't mention, but there was yet another part of this genetic study where they reconstructed the world's faces. They really traced a lot of different groups to find that there's traces of Neanderthal and Denisovans throughout the current human race. The Denisovans tend to be more in fact, in areas where they've been found in Eastern Asia, Melanesia, and so forth. So, when people talk about how the Neanderthals went extinct, well, in a way they went extinct, but in a way they survive in us. How many have done that where you go to Ancestry? Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, recommended doing that genetic testing to see, where, not just where your ancestors, but anybody ever done that? Because they'll tell you.
Not answered, but 21 and me.
Oh, 23 and me.
23 and me.
Yeah, because we got 23 pairs of chromosomes. Did they report that you had some Neanderthal or Denisovan in you?
I don't think so.
Okay, so
Long
anyways,
time ago.
yeah. At any rate, so that's been your moment of science. And keep in mind that although there are many reasons to love science, beyond just the wow factor, lots of believers follow science to some degree too. We present these moments apart as food for thought that can really just nourish our efforts to make sense of things that cannot be figured out strictly scientifically, right? It's not, the church is not about science, but we borrow the methods of science, and scientists import, as we talked about last month, they import interpretive frameworks from everyday life. I mean, where else would they get them from? Because most of what fills our everyday lives are these subjective experiences, things that science can't really make anything out of. And we talked about the fact that philosophers call this qualia, kind of the quality of your observations. Two people can look at the same thing, and there's an objective component of it, but the qualia is what pops into your mind because of your upbringing and just the way you are. These are
There
things.
a special responsibility for atheists to be able to come up with an ethical framework of how to deal with some of these advancements in science? And what happens when, it's not if, but when you're able to artificially create a human being?
Right.
What are the ethical aspects of that?
Right.
What if you create, a race of people that don't have the mental capability that other people have? What happens?
Or what if you do the opposite? What if you put some human DNA in a cat or a dog to make them more human-like? So yeah, there's lots of interesting questions, and the answer I would give is I think we do have a responsibility. It's going to take time, and of course the pace of change we'll talk about in a minute also has to do with this. But I mean, the traditional religions have been falling down the job for centuries. So who's going to pick up the slack? We have to.
Well, you hear that China just arrested the scientist that edited human DNA.
Convicted him, put him in prison
3 years, yeah.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, he's lucky to be alive. Usually they just shoot you and charge the family for the bullet.
What did they do? Edit the human DNA?
Well, they
Yep.
made birth and kill that.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, he made some changes using the CRISPR, or one of the methods that was supposed to make them more resistant to AIDS. So I guess by all accounts they're doing okay, but it's certainly taken a big risk just to get your name splashed in the headlines, and now his name's splashed in the headlines for reasons I'm sure he's not very proud of. Anyways, we can still exercise a skepticism and critical analysis of the subjective side of our lives, just as things happen in science. It's just that, I can't show you my experience. I can describe it, we can discuss it, and that's what we're here to do. But to try to use the methods of science as best we can, to the degree that we can, mainly the critical analysis. I think most people think science, they put too much emphasis on the hypothesis, experiment, and you know, that sort of thing, and you don't really do that in your life. But lots of science involves, like the Denisovans and so forth. We don't have any Denisovans, but there's lots of, it's like a historical discipline. There's other ways to gather evidence, and we should do that in our lives. Other rational people can help us as we try to critically examine what goes on and our feelings, and other people can help us consider other possibilities about how to think about our lives that we might not otherwise have thought of. Of course, it always falls to each of us alone to try to make sense of our human condition as we know it. So let me move on then to promise. This is kind of a switch up. Rusty Mantle, our webmaster, came up with this title because he said we've been doing what's going to happen in the future and that sort of thing enough. So we'll talk this time about what things never change. Today's bulletin deals with the subject of change, but also stasis, and the two earliest thinkers who developed opposite ideas and arguments about which is more important. It's too bad that people today are deterred by the ideas, let alone the names, of these ancient Greek philosophers, Parmenides up there on the left, and Heraclitus on the right, and then along the bottom there we see Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Besides just having to learn how to say the names, Steve Martin famously said he studied philosophy, including Socrates and Plato. But these were just ordinary people thinking about pretty simple things, were really the only things that anybody could think about back then. And they did much better with making sense about most things than anything in the Bible, some of which was composed at the time that they lived in the 3rd and 5th centuries BCE. Indeed, it may be surprisingly, this St. Paul guy and the gospel writers lived and wrote long afterwards. They were thoughtless ignoramuses compared to these ancient Greeks whose knowledge of the world was hardly any better, and in most cases much worse than the proverbial 5th grader of today. Yet the Bible, and especially the New Testament, are supposed to be the Word of God, completely without any error, and poured over by otherwise intelligent people who believe that it contains the only correct answer to any important question. If you're going to read any philosophy, it's in many ways easier and more entertaining to learn about Parmenides and Heraclitus than, say, Hegel and Kant. Anybody who takes a philosophy, you know, Hegel and Kant, you would know that, and even more recent philosophers like this Jacques Derrida. They're confusing and convoluted. The challenge of the ancient thinkers is not that they're so difficult to get, but that they had different interpretive frameworks than we have today. Different ideas about the structure of the universe and what the universe is, and much more limited tools to make sense of it. This is ancient cosmology, where the Earth is at the center of the universe, of course, and there's layers of air and fire above the Earth, and then the moon orbits the planet. They made these surmises from just observing the motions of the heavenly bodies. They knew of the moon and the sun, you see, and then 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then beyond that was a fixed stars. They were just frozen. Nothing was going on up there. It was fixed and unchanging, and therefore, to their way of thinking, perfect and incorruptible. That's why some of these Greek myths, you know, or somebody like the Gemini twins or somebody else, you know, they turned them into a constellation. That was kind of a way of making them immortal. They were rewarded by being made into a constellation. Below the level of the moon's orbit, not where the gods were, but on the Earth, that was where things changed or could change, where things were imperfect, even defective, because it meant that they were corruptible. And if you remember your New Testament, St. Paul talks about this, you know, the whole goal is Christianity, learn these secrets, and then you can have an incorruptible body. How many have heard of this paradox of Achilles and the tortoise? This is mentioned in today's bulletin. As explained there, Parmenides, one of those philosophers back there, he claimed that motion is impossible because, consider this, that the slower runner is given a head start, and then the faster runner takes off. The faster runner, by the time they get up to where the slower guy started, the slower guy's moved on. So now he's going to catch up to that, but by that time he's moved on too. So this just created a mathematical kind of conundrum, a paradox, an impossibility. So Parmenides said this showed that motion was an illusion. It was just impossible. The problem that we can appreciate today, of course, is that the mathematics available to the ancients couldn't deal with infinite series like a half plus a fourth plus an eighth plus a sixteenth, etc. That would be the case if the slower runner were given a head start halfway to the finish line and could run only half as fast as the faster runner. That is, if it was impossible, even for the best mathematicians of today, then it had to just show that motion did not exist. And it seems really strange, doesn't it, that people would accept this as proving that all motion was actually impossible, and therefore all motion is just illusory. But think of what we say today, that solid matter is actually almost entirely empty space. That's just empty space. Ow! That all matter consists of just, not stuff, but probability distributions for quantum fields. We believe this, however counterintuitive, because that's what the best math that we have says it is. That's all they were doing. Isn't that weird? So don't let what seems to make no sense confuse you. It only makes no sense because, to build on what we talked about last month, we talked about myths that we live by, these interpretive frameworks, the sense that we make of things and that our ancient ancestors made of the things in their day depends on these interpretive frames. When it's supposed that the heavens beyond the moving celestial super beings are fixed and absolute, then things that are fixed and absolute seem divine and perfect, and everything else will seem to be defective, even fallen, because it is subject to breakage and decay. And if the math says that all movement and all change creates impossible paradoxes, then it must be the idea of movement and change that's illusory, because the math can't be wrong. All this relates to the fact that change and stasis are and have been important religious questions. People don't usually think of them as such, but they are. They've been important religious questions for millennia. These concepts come up naturally when questions are asked, such as how the world came to be the way it is. Where did it come from? And where is it going? What's going to happen next? Clearly, those who worship the Bible think the answers are in their book. Ken Ham, you know, the creationist whack-toid, calls his organization Answers in Genesis. And Ecclesiastes famously asserts, there's nothing new under the sun, so there's your statement in favor of stasis. At the same time, supernatural religions teach that there's a great cosmic scale drama unfolding, although it will allegedly end in a final static eternity of oblivion or divine bliss, depending on whether you believe in nirvana or an afterlife. And as the bulletin points out, the allegedly most advanced concept of monotheism is of an unchanging deity, which originally had to do with heaven being in those beyond the moon regions. Remember? In the biblical book of Malachi, the Bible deity says, I change not, which of course is completely at odds with the behavior of this deity in other parts of the Bible. An unchanging, immutable God. Think about that for a moment. It could not do anything. It could not decide things. Those all involve things changing. It could not create worlds or beings like angels and humans. It could not answer prayers or intervene in, say, the course of the hurricanes or illnesses, or which side wins a sports game. If you change not, you're completely disconnected from all that. Any such actions would have to reflect some change in the leanings in the so-called mind of God. Aversion to change, this is very interesting too. Aversion to change is also to be found in human nature. Some people suffer from it to a pathological degree, and for example, what's called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD, you know, where you wash your hands compulsively or you worry about doing rituals. How religious that sounds, huh? Depending on the religion, of course. And it has been linked to traditional religions involving repetitive rituals, prayers, and so on. You know, think about the whirling dervishes and all that. Were you able to read that? It's kind of small, but they looked at groups of Christians and Muslims and looked at their OCD characteristics, and they found that it correlated with what they call religiosity. You have to drill down deeper to see how they define religiosity. Science and progress, of course, are all about change. So is the evolution of life under the influence of random genetic variation and natural selection. Growth and development, none of us would be here today if the babies we once were had not grown and developed. Learning, improvement, the acquisition of insight, wisdom, what psychologists call self-actualization, they're all obviously examples of change. Arguably, it is an essential human characteristic to be subject to and capable of change. Of course, some changes are unwelcome, like aging and the wounds and scars and lessons learned in a school of hard knocks, but what would we be if we did not or could not change? What sort of existence would that be, if it would be existence at all in this right eternal bliss? A river that did not flow would be a pond or a lake, not a river. So a human being that could not grow, learn, and acquire wisdom and insight would we even be a human being? And I would think a good argument could be made that we would not be. Stasis and change and the tension between them relate to almost everything. And as you go through the rest of the month, think about that. It relates to people's political leanings. And 2020, of course, will be even more embroiled in politics than usual. I really should put politics, in quotes, because the word has in the past simply meant to refer to public policy, to what role the government plays, but politics, now has come to refer to the underhanded, unfair, and even vicious pursuit of power in government circles, regardless of what sort of public policy may be served by those engaging in that behavior. But now consider that conservatism would almost by definition seem to be in favor of stasis, of maintaining the status quo, right? While progressivism can mean nothing other than improvement. The word progress is right in the word. But of course, in practice, the laissez-faire economic policies usually favored by so-called conservatives allow disruptive innovations that can cause people to be put out of work, companies to relocate to other countries, and even whole industries to be transformed or destroyed. By the way, who here still has a telephone landline in their home? 3, 4 people. You have one, John?
Yep. I don't use it. It's a backup.
All right, well, this kind of squares. It says in 2003, the percentage of adults who relied on cell phones only was less than 5%.
Wow.
Now it's over 50%. Over 50% do not have a landline. Okay, so how about progressives? On the other hand, they usually favor public policies that slow down and lessen the impact of new technologies and business practices on people, right? They're the ones who like to, have feather bedding and unions and stuff. But again, the politicians of both parties have campaigned on the promise of change. Of course, they always campaign on the promise of change when they're seeking to displace the official of the other party. Or they campaign on the need to stay the course when they're the incumbent. So it is a messy business trying to apply the idea of stasis versus change when it comes to people's political leanings or public policies. But still, you see these forces, these themes there. It seems likely that the pace of change impacts people's acceptance or resistance to it. And this is a kind of diagram indicating, the kinds of changes, people don't change hardly at all at the bottom. Culture changes more slowly. It's easier to change people's interactions. I mean, how fast did Twitter catch on, for example? I think it was like a few months or something. Some changes elicit more resistance than others. Gay marriage got, boom, it was done. It took a lot longer to get people allowed to marry each other who were different quote-unquote races. People quickly adopt some things that save them money or time or are easier, while resisting other things that are more disruptive to their lives and habits. Cell phones, as I said, they caught on pretty quickly once they became affordable. Electric cars, that's going to be a little slower going for obvious reasons. Where are you going to charge and what's the cost and so on. Now, how about adopting metric? When will the United States ever adopt metric standards of measurement? This was talked about back in the 1960s. Yeah, maybe never, Aaron. Remember NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter? That's the one that got all the way to Mars and then failed its orbital insertion and was lost, either burned up in the thin Martian atmosphere or otherwise flew off into space, because it was sent instructions from Earth in pound force second units instead of the metric Newton second units it was designed for.
What do you think the main reason is? The cost? Could it cost?
It would be costly. Kit was telling me, what was the reason why you would not want to change the metric? You have to get all new tools and stuff?
I don't know,
We tried to in America.
Yeah, we did make an
Yeah,
attempt many years ago.
But you have to change, it is the cost.
On food packages, they put both, of course, many times.
But I think
I
it
was-
is cost,
Yeah.
because
You
all
have to
this, to
change all
convert everything, you'd have to really do it slow.
But it's a learning curve, and people are resistant to having to learn.
Yeah.
And then having to convert, because for a while you'd have to convert.
Yeah.
See, when I was raised professionally, we used kilograms. A baby weighs 3,200 kilograms. Now it's pounds and ounces.
But now soft drinks
It's
are
not
sold
hard to
in
convert
liters.
unless a kid weighs 4,540 grams, which is on 10 pounds. You don't know.
But now
Maybe
soft drinks are sold only in liters now, the big.
That's right, you got 2-liter bottles.
They only
So
success.
there's some changes happening there. Anyways, a slower pace of change can't bring about any change, of course. It is a myth. You can't boil a live frog by turning the heat up ever so slowly. The frog will jump out. I can't. That's a myth.
I didn't know that.
Yep. You learn something new all the time, and especially when you come to church, see how many other churches in town do you go to and learn stuff. Stasis and change feature prominently in science. As we know, even the atoms in a solid object are in continual motion, and unless something is at a temperature of absolute zero, which we learned back in July, it's radiating energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation, or so-called black body radiation. It might be below the visible spectrum, but nonetheless it is. These tables, us, floors and ceilings, they're all glowing. It's just not in the visible spectrum. At the same time, this and the most dynamic and active changes known, such as exploding supernovas. Remember, they're out in those unchanging and perfect regions of the heavens. And by the way, that was a large part of why Galileo was, why his observations were so subversive, and why his critics refused even to look through his telescope. You know, those were demonic. If they showed movement out in the unchanging, perfect regions of space, there was something wrong. That was where Galileo got into problems. It was not with saying the Earth was round or something like that. But all those processes, even way out in the perfect regions, exploding supernovas are proceeding in ways that depend on and indeed are caused by physical, what we call laws. So regular, so reliable are these regularities of nature. And so far as we know, at least in our region of space-time, those are absolutely stable and unchanging. It's the Crab Nebula on the right, shows little molecular molecules bouncing around on the left, all the different degrees of freedom in which they can move. And now, think not of things changing over time, which is only our experience, but of space-time as a single thing. And then you can see that really everything is indeed fixed and motionless, just as Parmenides said, so that everything in all existence is something that never changes. All you have to do is draw a time axis there, see? This is represented in two-dimensional, but the whole idea is it's a four-dimensional manifold. So that past, present, and future all exist. It's just that only our being humans experiencing time. We have to experience time because the chemical reactions that are happening in our bodies take place over that axis, over that dimension. So it just depends on your perspective.
See, in science, they were saying, why just this universe? There could be many multiverses.
Right, and they're also just like this, loaves of bread, as it were, fixed in, time and space. So you came in and looked at our title, some things never change. And in reality, everything doesn't change. Well, there's several songs that assert that some things never change. I thought about starting off with that and then riffing on that. We can do that some other time, but you might guess that these songs have nothing to do with the space-time manifold or with science at all, but with everyday things that at least seem to never change. And so let's think about some of those things that never change. Here is a landmark. Recognize that? Although it's far away in North Africa, that's the Rock of Gibraltar. It's a familiar symbol of stability and permanence. And we may think of others, but we would need to be careful. There's a park in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, for example. If you ever go to Memphis, go to this Mud Island Park. They have a walk-along scale model of the Mississippi River. You've been there, you know it's there. It details all sorts of interesting things about the Mississippi River, including, among other things, that the river has changed course over time. Right? So, big catastrophes happening. There are towns miles from where the river is now that once were situated on the banks of the river. And as many of you may remember, those of you who were alive in 1980 or when you were 4 years old maybe, Mount St. Helens, a mountain, was blown away by a volcanic eruption in 1980. So there can hardly be a finale on this general subject, but let me conclude with some things that while they may change or seem to change, there are also things that we cannot usually change. And the Serenity Prayer comes to mind. How many have heard of that, the Serenity Prayer? Here, most people have heard of it. So I think the Serenity Prayer is among the most inspiring words of wisdom that need not be a pleading to a deity as much as an aspiration or aim for every thoughtful person engaged in the often difficult business of everyday living. And I think it would be better if many more atheists did pay attention to it. And leaving out the God bit, it would go this way. Let me seek serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Well, this was composed by American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, lived from 1892 to 1971. He used it over the course of his career beginning sometime in the 1930s. Of course, Niebuhr, Christian, he was a believer. He helped to develop the perspective of what was called Christian realism. Definitely not a biblical fundamentalist approach, but not an atheist one either. And again, I think atheists have a responsibility to be a little bit flexible and draw some distinctions when they matter. So Niebuhr was not an atheist, not like Episcopal Bishop John Shelby Spahn. Interesting guy there. If you've never read any of his books, that would be recommended. And Bishop Pike even more. I haven't read. Has he written some books too?
He precedes Spahn by 2 or 3 decades.
Oh wow, okay. So
Much more radical than Spahn.
even more radical. That's cool. Well, that's what I'm saying. We atheists should find our allies where we can. Just if somebody's not a super fundamentalist, you're damned to hell. If they're, like the Bible says, if they're not against you, they're with you. Anyways, remember Niebuhr lived during the years of Hitler, Stalin, and Holocaust, and this Christian realism focused basically on 3 main ideas. First, the sinfulness of humanity. Like I said, the years that he lived through, boy. The second element of the Christian realism is the freedom of humanity, and I think we largely agree with that. And the third is the importance of the biblical Great Commandment. Don't get that confused with the Great Commission to go out and proselytize and hassle people. The Great Commandment was basically the golden rule, although contaminated by the, you have to love God first business. At any rate, the serenity affirmation, we may call it, is an excellent statement of purpose, though of course there are the details. For example, just because something can be changed doesn't mean it should be. One has also to have the wisdom to know when, what changes are desirable and how best to bring about the change and how to do it, and so on. So what are some things we need to have serenity to accept? Well, the inevitability of change. This too shall pass. That phrase comes from a Persian thinker, by the way, an early Muslim, from what I can tell, almost an atheist Muslim type of philosopher. But this too shall pass is an important thing to keep in mind. And notice it doesn't say just bad things are going to pass, although it's another great saying to say that when you're going through hell, keep going. But the good things also pass. Whatever you're experiencing, this too shall pass. And in most cases, you don't have much ability to do anything about it. And another whole church service could be the whole idea of, can you recover? If you have a good experience, can you go back to it? Thomas Wolfe wrote this famous book, You Can't Go Home Again. Can you go home again? There have been things written about that too. How about the weather and other forces of nature? Things that are bigger than we are, and especially things that cannot be reasoned with. Some things you just have to put up with. Whether you're being raped or not. Which comment cost who is it, Clements?
Clayton Williams.
William Clements. Anyways.
No, Clayton Williams.
Clayton Williams, yeah.
Republican candidate for governor.
Right, who was out with a bunch of journalists on his ranch and started raining. He said, rain, it's the weather, you can't do anything about it. But then he said something really stupid. He said, it's kind of like rape, you can't do anything about it, so just sit back and enjoy it. That cost him the election. And it should have. It really should have. So there's that. And then this is one thing you're going to remember too. Murphy's Law. When's the last time you thought about Murphy's Law? So putting it into your brain again today. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible moment. And then there's all sorts of entertaining riffs on this, like if there's 2 ways to do things, the right way and the wrong way, somebody's going to do it the wrong way. Or if there's different wrong ways to do it, somebody's going to pick the worst way, and so on and so forth. But you just have to kind of expect the worst, and you'll never be disappointed. Kind of maybe a cynical way to go through life, but it's a matter of being prepared. Remember our service on scouting, that's their slogan, be prepared, and you have to be prepared for bad stuff. If you're not prepared for bad stuff, that's when you really suffer. What else? The past. You can't change the past. It's stuck. And things that you remember, although memories can be morphed, they can kind of degrade, you can forget things, but this is partly an admonition for how to live your life. Try to live so that you don't have regrets, so that you're not going to have to remember doing some bad thing or not responding in a way that you know you really should have. And of course the future, but again, that's Murphy's Law.
A lot of that is managing your expectations.
Managing your expectations, yes, and that would be especially true in some lines of work, certainly investing, medicine, but really living your life generally, very important to keep these things in mind. Well, this is inevitable too, right? Nothing you do about those, death and taxes. And then, other people, their opinions, their state of mind, their character, and that great Aesop story, remember where the old man and his son are taking the donkey to the market to, I guess, sell the donkey or something, and they start out by the old man riding the donkey and the young man walking along, and passersby are saying, look at that, this old man is forcing his little kid to do all the work of walking. So they switch places, and pretty soon passerbys are saying, look at that, that boy is forcing his old man who's all broken down and probably has bad knees to do the walking. So then they finally both get on the donkey, and then what do the passersby say? Look what they're doing to that poor donkey. So you can't please everyone. And of course, Abraham Lincoln knew that you couldn't fool everyone. You could fool some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time.
You can't please everyone, so you gotta please yourself.
Yeah.
That's very important. Do please yourself, but make sure, but you know, there's a sense of proportion there too. You know, pleasing yourself at the expense of other people's sensibilities. So.
It's Ricky Nelson saying.
Yeah, that is Ricky Nelson.
Oh, now I've got something else to look up. So, it's all the devil is always in the details, as they say. So that we don't conclude on too cheery a thought, though, let me show you one more video. And that is titled Top 7 Emerging Trends That Will Change
We take a look at
Our
seven
World.
evolutionary technologies which could completely change our world. Current modern-day computers are becoming deadlocked by Moore's law, and they will eventually be replaced by a new type of computing technology. Quantum computers utilize quantum bits, otherwise known as qubits. These qubits behave quantumly, so they have the ability to use 1 and 0
We just heard about quantum computers
allowing for
before,
exponentially faster calculations. However, current quantum computing is still in its infancy phase since qubits are notoriously tricky to manipulate and maintain, so they're not able to play crisis or even run Windows for that matter. Only time will tell if quantum computers become a part of our everyday lives. At number 6, nanomachines. We have utilized basic forms of nanotechnology with self-cleaning materials and sunblock which reflects ultraviolet light. But this technology is still in its infancy phase, and we have only begun to discover its potential. Imagine a set of nanomachines which could destroy cancer cells, or have the ability to transform a truck to a sports car. There really is no limit to what nanotechnology can do. But the main problem with nanomachines is that it does bring up a new realm of problems associated with energy and even production. And we also have to consider that nanomachines can be one of the most powerful weapons ever made, which could make it to be one of the most revolutionary and deadliest technologies at the same time. But the engineering gains at a nanoscale can also lead to new developments in metamaterials. And they are not really machines, but they're more so materials which don't occur naturally. A few examples would include a cloaking device, or even a super lens which gets around the problems associated with wave decay. But the applications of metamaterials are basically endless. Ultimately, if we can figure out how to build and mass produce things at a nanoscale, it will completely change our world. At number 5, ultracapacitors. We always hear about a new battery invention every year, and it's almost comical at this point. But inventing something which supersedes existing battery technology and actually making it practical, well, that's another story. We also have to keep in mind that batteries have limited lifespans and they have lengthy charging times. That's where capacitors can overtake this type of technology, since they can charge within seconds, endure more cycles, and even undergo greater temperature variations. But the only problem is that capacitors do not quite carry the same energy density as a battery. So a car running on the equivalent weight of capacitors would not quite get the mileage as you would on batteries. That is quickly changing though, and research is being done with graphene and metal carbides to make a better capacitor, which has greater energy density. Combined with getting the cost of capacitors down, then we could ultimately see the capacitor replace the battery. The question is how long is that really going to take? At number 4, limited AI. I'm going to re-emphasize the word limited because this type of AI system...
What is the major difference between capacitor and battery?
All right, well, if, for those of you who might not have had to take electronics courses and that, capacitors are basically two metal plates that are separated by a distance. And you can charge them in such a way that this carries a large positive charge and this negative. There's a voltage difference between them. So if you put a wire between them, you provide a way for them to connect, there's your current flow. In fact, we used to play with big ones because if you put something in between those two metal plates, because the current can't jump a very far distance, but if you put something in between them, then it can jump across these. You put a metal thing between them, you can see this big spark going from one side to the other. So now imagine if you had tons and tons of tiny capacitors, and if you had metamaterials, special materials, then you would not, because batteries all rely on chemical reactions that have to go back and forth. Whereas a capacitor, you just hook it up to the charge, boom, it's charged. Like you said, you can charge it in seconds. So
are they more short-term than working?
Well, they are right now because they don't carry the current density.
Yeah.
You just get that spark. But you could, if you could use metamaterials and engineer them in such a way that that you had greater current density, and that's what they're saying they're working on. That would just be fantastic.
That would revolutionize.
It could exactly in electric vehicles. You could take less time to refuel your electric vehicle than it does to pull that gas thing off.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that we could take all these fossil fuels and things that we could use all these hydrocarbons to make stuff, including all these plastics and things, instead of burning them up. If we had the ability to, have a better battery.
There was a new battery that was just developed from nuclear waste, and the life of the battery belongs to nuclear waste.
Oh wow! Well, that's forever.
That's another thing too. They have
4,000
these. They have these small nuclear auxiliary power (SNAP) units. If you do a search on that, you can read up on basically a little, like these battery backups you can buy for your house, where they call Generac's and stuff like that. You can get things that are not much bigger than that are basically nuclear powered. You can just run your house or maybe your whole block for decades.
Yeah, they don't deplete the battery, they simply have a small current that will continue as long as it continues to radiate.
Right.
So put enough of those in and you can really power something.
Right, so that's working on the basis of nuclear reactions, which is why the attraction there. But of course, because it's nuclear, it's scary. But the main batteries, if you have regular batteries, they work on the basis of chemistry, because if you forget, leave one in a drawer for a while, you come back and it's all crusting and leaking, and the chemicals are all nasty.
But that would be
capacitors wouldn't do that.
That'd be a big game changer if they ever
huge. And this is really, I was having a discussion with this. Well, I have lots of discussions with Kit these days, but this is the thing that really has made our lives better, isn't it? It hasn't been politicians electing the right people, right? That's not really what's made people's lives better. It's been game-changing technology. And it's been substituting steam engines and electric power for animals. It's been, you name it. Having the auxiliary brain in your cell phone that have your address book and so on and so forth, and getting rid of paper and having the page around.
Yeah.
It's been things that have made your life easier, and really the technology, the advances in technology. That's why I wanted to finish up on this, I think, a little more cheery note than all the things you can't change. There are changes coming that we can look forward to. Although, like the nanotech thing goes, you could always turn these things.
They could invent a type of virus.
For bad purposes too, sure, yeah. Because having total control over matter and energy, that's kind of where we are heading. And even Andrew Yang with his, I'm just going to give people free money. Eventually, we're going to have something like that. He's going to turn out to be right, but he's not right now.
Right.
But eventually, if machines, robots can build and provide all the goods and services, what's going to be left for us to do? Guess what? I think we'll find something.
You're the first person to suggest UBI?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's right. It was talked about back during the Nixon. Actually, Milton Friedman, the big libertarian, was behind that. Although they weren't talking about a universal basic income for everyone. They were talking basically about a negative income tax, which we do have to some degree in the form of the earned income tax credit. Okay, ready to go on? So we're talking about artificial intelligence, which we have a whole service. I think last year we talked quite a bit about AI.
It's already in place, and it's rapidly changing things. From driving vehicles to performing surveillance, it has no doubt proved that it can outperform humans in certain tasks, and it has limitless potential. So what about a fully conscious AI? And why am I not mentioning that? Well, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. The riddle to consciousness is figuring out how it even works. Is it based on survivability, or is it something deeper than that, like a soul? There is no
Okay, I'll pause it now since we paused it before. Consciousness, ask yourself this. I mean, artificial intelligence, playing a game, even, hold'em poker and so forth, that's all objective stuff. How about consciousness? Can you show me consciousness?
Yeah.
Can you show it to me?
No.
No. Can a machine measure it? No. So now we're talking subjective. And this, as you go through and see these kinds of things talked about, I don't know, what if you did build an AI and at some point the AI said, hey, I'm conscious? Is it just saying that? Or is it conscious?
Turing test.
There wouldn't be any way to know. In philosophy, they call it the problem of other minds. Each of you is a machine to me. If I could drill down and look in your brains, all I'd see is molecules moving around. And what would the molecules be doing? They'd just be doing what molecules normally do, what they have to do because of the laws of physics, right? But from inside, that's not your experience. And that's really kind of the great mystery and the thing we should be trying to make sense of. That's just the way it is. So we have this objective task of making sense of the world, we call that science, and then we have this inner task of what I would say that's really what religion is. But people get it all mixed up. We gotta set the world right. Set them straight.
universal agreement on what life even is. So humanity can progress another 100, even 1,000 years into the future, and there still may not be an answer to this problem. But at some point, maybe not in our lives, but sometime in the future, it may become very difficult to tell the difference between a human and a limited AI system for training a human. At number 3, VR immersion. It's not really that far off to think that we may just end up living in a fantasy world, if we are not already. Total VR immersion would obviously be able to stimulate all 5 senses, and therefore we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between real life and the VR world. With nearly half the population in poverty, this would be a very powerful incentive to visit VR, but that is only if the technology becomes cost viable to everyone. Obviously, this is a topic for a whole other video, and let's just hope that people are not eventually jacked into a Matrix-style system. But if we take it one step further, augmented reality, which superimposes images and information on the real world, may be the key to power. And it might give one person an information advantage over anyone who does not have access to the technology. Obviously, this would create more of a disparity in society, and it just shows once again that technology can be both a benefit and a detriment to our everyday lives. At number 2, room temperature superconductors. Superconductors were discovered over 100 years ago, and they have a property of exhibiting zero electrical resistance. They also expel magnetic fields, and as some of you know, I like doing experiments on the spirit effect. Ultimately, whoever figures out how to make a room temperature superconductor will hold one of the most important keys to the future of technology. From hover trains to ultra-efficient motors, and even power lines with zero energy loss, there would be a complete revolution. Now, we have experimented with a few things, and nothing has been clarified just yet. One of them being metallic hydrogen, but it is also very unlikely to be metastable. It might just be superconductive when it's under extreme pressure. Graphene also could be superconductive, but this is a 2-dimensional layer and it still needs to be cooled down. But having said that, there have been advances in graphene design and production. So it could be the answer to this problem. We'll just have to wait and see. That's number 1, fusion power. Well, let's be honest here, we always hear about how fusion power is just around the corner. But this time around, I think there are some real breakthroughs. From MIT to the ITER and even the tokamak reactor, there are multiple projects around the world which are using different approaches to a stable reaction. There's even the Lockheed Compact Fusion Reactor project, which is intended to be a mobile 100 megawatt unit. Not much more information has been cleared lately. MIT has also made the extreme claim that they will produce stable fusion power as soon as 2025. But maybe fusion power is not the answer to our energy needs. It might come from an outsider which is pretty much ignored by mainstream science. One example of this is the brilliant light power sun cell reactor. To sum this up, it's basically a reaction which forces hydrogen atoms to go to a lower than ground state and exhibit enormous amounts of energy. Now, yes, I know, this is technically impossible, but it's kind of neat to see working prototypes actually produce a reaction. Ultimately, whether it comes from fusion or some other source, it is much needed, and it will help advance our civilization into the future. So once again, thanks for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. And make sure to subscribe to my channel.
What was that about turning hydrogen into what?
Getting hydrogen into a lower than ground state. So that's really blue sky stuff.
Yeah.
And like you said, theoretically, I mean, to me, that's sort of in the category of tachyons, particles that move faster than light. So there's some things to look forward to that are exciting, promising. If we don't see them, maybe our descendants will, future generations. We're almost coming up on 12 o'clock, so we've been going for a while. We have been having fun. Any further discussion?
What about time again? When was the 24-hour, was that what, the 1860s or something?
Oh, actually, the division of minutes and seconds, I mean, I think that goes back to many centuries.
No, but I mean the time zones.
Oh, the time zones.
That was because of trains, wasn't it? So they wouldn't run in.
Yeah, that was very important at that time, and of course, remember Magellan himself didn't make it all the way around the world. When his men got back to Spain, they had lost a day. They're like, what the heck happened? Oh, because you went around the world, so the world was turning. And, so.
Do you know when that 24-hour, was it a worldwide consensus that?
I wish Berlin was here, because he probably would know that. He was really the guy who knew about calendars and the conventions and things like that.
Yeah.
And delve into it, it'll tell you a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there were water clocks, they kept time with, candles burning for sundials.
For a while, only atomic clock. Sometimes people went into changing the seasons.
Right.
And then
initially, and the moon, and the phases of the moon. Right. So, anyway, so we should have more discussion. Why isn't this going? There we go. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's all a neat video. We can have more discussion at Jason's. We always get together at the Jason's over off MacArthur, the salad bar. In the winter months, they've been having lobster bisque. Oh, that stuff's good. So please think about all these things. I know you will. You won't be able to help yourself. But remember too, while you're here, Freethought is not free. Thank you, John. Just deposited. You should all, see monkey do. Put all your cash, coin, gold bars. Well, you have to take the top off to get the gold bars in, but put everything in those rainbow-colored boxes back there to help us pay our bills. Dallas Morning News stopped having a religion section. At least I've never seen it, and if I ever hear word that they've started up again, we do that. But the Fort Worth Star Telegram still does in all their editions, so we always run an ad over there. Why? Because we get so many new people to come and join us? No, but it's like waving our banner. We're here. Let them think that we're a 5,000 strong congregation every month. But we often have more turnout than we've had today. But that's the main thing you can do. Just come on and help us participate in this project that's been going on for these years.